Warning. The following stories are not for the faint of heart. If you are grossed out easily, please watch another video. Redditors who clean up crime scenes. What's the most bizarre thing you've witnessed? A family friend removes the deceased from their homes, etc. since they own their own funeral home. They said that the weirdest thing they saw was a woman lying face up in a tub and a man laying on top of her. When she took them apart, she knew why they were like that. Guy had domestic abuse problems and they were going through a separation. Kids in the other room. Mom in the bathroom doing her hair. The guy comes in and just stabs her several times. Puts her in the tub and places the knife in her hands while he jumps on top of her and stabs himself either in the chest or abdomen and bleeds out. She said she'll never forget how sad and unusual it was. Especially for those kids who thankfully were asleep. I think her mom found them. I hate thinking about it, and I hope that family can heal. Open bracket. Was expecting them to be found like that due to the bang bang, not the stab. Right? When I first heard this story I thought it was gonna be something like that too. Hey. One I can answer. I clean up suicides. Decomps, where the person has been dead for days or weeks before being found. And crime scenes. You find the obvious stuff like sex toys, drug paraphernalia. One time I found a maybe fictional, maybe autobiographical journal of how this guy lost his testicles in an angle grinder accident. This same guy had a small metal pipe, like a weed one-hitter, along with some kind of dried fruit, like cherries or small plums, hidden in a box in his closet. It was like he was smoking it. IDK. We are pretty versed in the world of drugs and we couldn't figure that shit out. As many first responders have already pointed out, the amount of brain and skull fragments left behind is a lot bigger than what I would have imagined. Shit. They'll leave eyeballs behind. I've seen over half of an intact brain. A skull fragment big enough to use as a bowl. Teeth. They get the biggest part of the body and roll out. They're not gonna spend an hour looking for all the giblets. That's why they pay us the big bucks. What's strange to me is that a lot of adults go to their parents' house to kill themselves. Kinda fucked up. Suicide season is not during the holidays. We are way more busy during spring and the end of the year. The most eerie thing is how often we do suicides in rooms that just look normal. It's hard to explain, but it's just strange to go into a normal looking bedroom with a half-drank Gatorade on the dresser, a half-read book on the nightstand, and a big old blood stain on the floor. Also seeing the different ways the families cope with the tragedy. Our service is expensive, yo. And there's been times I thought I was gonna get hit when I told them our estimated price. Especially if it's grandma or grandpa that swallowed a bullet and half the fucking family tree is at the house. I've done suicides as young as 12 and as old as 80s. You get the people that are just on autopilot, that ask weird questions cause they really aren't on the same plane of existence. We tear out all the carpet in a room if a gun is used. CSF is clear and is also a BBP carrier. So if it looks clean, it might still be contaminated. We've had the carpet pulled and removed, and I've had family members ask, while they're looking at the slab concrete, if we are just gonna shampoo the carpet. You get the people that seem almost happy that the person is gone. I've heard people say, well, now that their kid is gone, we can finally take that cruise. IDK if it's just a coping mechanism, or if they're just massive assholes. I try not to judge. Keyword, try. Use a T-mop. Propane/nat gas explosion. Guy's arm was holding onto a ladder going up a holding tank. No body. No anything. Just an arm. Preemptive edit. It was his left arm. So the arm was left. Right. This isn't right. I guess he wasn't alright. Oh, I have a story about someone who launched their entrails over a bathroom that's probably 81 square feet. I clean up biohazard material, dead bodies, for my company on occasion. because I'm one of the only two that's certified. My coworker went into a house to clean a body, but the boss failed to mention they had been dead for 2 weeks. Okay. Whatever, I can deal with that. We walked to the house, and not only could you smell it from the start of the driveway, but all the windows were black. Okay. This dude had blackout curtains, I understand that. We suited up and went into the house, which was relatively clean given the circumstances. We knew he died in the bathroom, so we made our way upstairs and followed the flies. So, you know how flies swarm decaying things? Yeah, it wasn't blackout curtains in the bathroom. The windows were caked in so many flies that sunlight couldn't come in. My boss also failed to mention he died in the bathtub. You hear about bloating and blah blah blah, but do you know what happens when a body sits in a bathtub for 2 weeks and soaks up all that water? It explodes. The entrails and remains of this soup was all over the taking. The walls, the door. It was everywhere. There was no water in the bathtub, just this sickly pink colored stew. That was the most disgusting cleanup I've done by far. I can't even imagine what it sounded like when that happened. Edit. I love Reddit. Someone reposted my story and got 600 upvotes and gold. Oh well. My dad used to clean up crime and trauma scenes about 10 years ago and said he had to clean up a suicide one time where he found bits of brain on top of a ceiling fan. He thought that was the worst of it until they moved a TV stand and found a nose behind it. One of our worst was an old dude brought a hooker to his trailer. She robbed him, stabbed him, and put him on top of the electric stove with the burners on. That sounds disgusting. I want to know more. What did she think would happen? That his body would just disintegrate into ash? My best friend used to have this job. Most of the bizarre stuff was cleaning up suicides. Found a guy's full intact mustache across the room when he blew his head off with a shotgun. One guy tried to kill himself by shooting his stomach with a small caliber pistol. He didn't die immediately, so he wrote tons of whacked out stuff on the walls with his blood, then finished the job. Crime scene cleaner here. My first suicide cleanup was quite an experience. Man shot himself in the head in his garage. I'll never forget needing to use pliers to pull teeth and skull fragments out of the drywall behind where he sat. Or that blood and brain managed to make its way more than 50 feet across the garage. Most disturbing though was his pickup. We chose to take it to our company wash bay to pressure wash it and make sure it was as clean as possible. I cleaned it myself and was satisfied that I had done well. Inspected for blood and couldn't find anything. So I began driving it back to the owner's garage. On the way back a slight drizzle began and switched on the wiper blades. Imagine my horror as a chunk of brain streaks across my newly cleaned windshield. I pulled over quickly and cleaned it up. But it still makes me sick to think what would have happened if it didn't rain that day. This man's poor wife or daughter would have been met with that sight and been crushed again by the impact of suicide. That 10 years ago, and I'll never forget it. Now I triple or quadruple check every job. Just trying to do my part to get actual crime cleaners here, but I'm a medic, so similar I guess. One time we found this guy dead in his home in the corner of the living room, tucked around the couch. Ass up, no cloths on. Literal coffee ground looking shit spread everywhere across the house. On the floors. Furniture. Walls. Everywhere. Along with mass amounts of liquor bottles and glass everywhere. He had massive GI issues along with drinking himself to death. Don't know what was worse. The smell of the scene. Coffee ground looking shit, the hallmark of upper GI bleeding. Ignore this at your peril. Edit. Coffee ground vomit and black tarry shit. Had it wrong. I was gonna say, he probably had a massive internal bleed from all the alcohol. What a terrible way to go. Was dispatched to a vehicle vs pedestrian call a couple months ago. and when we arrived on scene it was like something out of a movie. Dude was running across a fairly busy 4-lane road and was hit by a car traveling about 55 miles per hour. After his head went through the windshield of the first vehicle, he then proceeded to be thrown into the opposite lane and was ran over and dragged about 20 yards by another vehicle. Once the coroner was on scene with traffic investigations, we proceeded to pick up his organs bit by bit. It was a fantastic anatomy lesson. And that is why you should not jaywalk in a nutshell. The VS makes it sound like a pedestrian ever has a chance. I'm a fire investigator. My worst one was a lady who committed suicide by immolation in her basement. When I got to the scene, the body had already been removed, but there was a clear pattern on the floor where she had died. An empty can of gasoline was nearby. Her glasses were gently placed on top of the water heater. On a table were several ritualistic books. Some passages were highlighted, involving ridding yourself of the darkness by performing the flame ritual and other culty stuff. So, to perform the act, she removed her glasses and placed them on the water heater. She doused herself in gasoline and lit herself on fire. You could see that she ran around the room, bumping into things and knocking things over before finally falling down at the center of the room, meeting her fate. Mental illness is some serious shit. I occasionally work on the weekends for a funeral home. It's decent money for what is essentially 2 hours of call out work when their normal staff is off. Last year I was called in at around 5 in the morning. A 30-something-year-old guy had killed himself, shot himself, in a pretty small 2-bedroom apartment. That wasn't the bizarre part at all, since I've seen it before on call-outs. What was bizarre was what was in the apartment. Literally thousands of documents, piled on the floor, on a desk, on shelves, of people's financial information, credit card statements, bank statements, personal data, etc. Probably 3,000 folders with all this stuff in it. Even where there weren't piles of folders, there were just loose papers, magnetic cards, surveillance cameras. It was just the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And of course, some of these documents and folders had blood and brains spattered all over them. Didn't matter to me though, since the detective on scene had said it was fine to take the body. The police had to clear a path by collecting the papers from the route we would take from the door to the apartment to where he was. A couple of months later, it came out that the guy had over $1 million in cash and Bitcoin. Apparently the state police were onto him. Family member did heavy duty cleaning including crime scenes. A guy shot his head off with a shotgun. EMTs were supposed to pick him up, literally, but missed a large chunk of brain behind a couch. That was when said family member decided to find other engagement. I can relate to this. FF/EMT. Respond to suicide with a rifle. He dead. Nothing for us to do but pronounce. Cops cover the body, then want to escort the family out of the death scene, because everyone is processed like a crime scene regardless, and it is the only way in or out of the property. Before they did so, though, my partner had to point out the guy's remarkably intact brain just sitting in the tree over his body. I don't do any sort of thing, but if anyone is interested in hearing some in-depth stories from someone who does, there is a podcast called The Cleaning of John Doe. It goes pretty in-depth, and it's very informative, but definitely not for the faint of heart. I was so sad when she stopped making episodes. It is super informative, and I appreciated the standards that she set within her industry. She always emphasized the importance of being respectful to the deceased and their family. Don't know if this counts as a crime scene, but at my work we had to pick teeth out of a rock garden after a guy blew his head off with a shotgun. I don't clean up crime scenes, but I do remove the deceased. I can get into more accurate detail of the deceased, but here's some general stuff. Hoarders are a lot more common than they really should be. First of all, and it's never a clean hoard. It's piles of junk covered in several types of urine, shit and vomit, molds I've never seen before, and probably insects that haven't even been discovered yet. I understand when the emergency services don't want to be in that kind of house longer than they have to, but I'll never forget having to ask them to help me because I couldn't distinguishing what was actually the deceased and what was just a piles of random shit that looked more human than the deceased did. People will warn you bodies will bloat, and touching them the wrong way will make them leak. But the image you're conjuring up doesn't even hold a light to what it can be like. Insects skittering when you delicately lift a 400-pound deceased onto your cot. Because one wrong move, and they will start using. Oh. And the ones who had pets who were so desperate they had to eat their owner. Staring into the eyes of a big, brown-eyed mutt who is happy to finally receive human contact. And all you can't think about is how the deceased is missing their entire face. Poor things were just hungry. But it's unsettling. Fellow funeral industry worker here. Just wanna say all of this. My first decomp was in a hoarder house. I will never forget that house. A friend of mine is a firefighter, and he told me about a scene of a wreck he showed up to. When he arrived there was a Corvette smashed under a trailer of an 18-wheeler. When they finally pulled the two apart, the driver of the Corvette's body was intact in the front seat with cell phone in hand. Meanwhile his head was in the back seat. Turns out he had been going at least 70 miles per hour while texting and didn't realize there was a red light and rammed into the back of an 18-wheeler. I never know how to feel for these types of people. On one hand it's a shame it had to end like that, but on the other there have been millions of warnings that this can happen if you text and drive. I do clean up crime scenes, but the best job I've done wasn't a crime scene. An older gentleman ordered a lady of the night for a good time back at his hotel, popped some Viagra, and while they were doing the deed something in his penis ruptured or tore and blood just started spraying literally everywhere. Blood on the bed, floor, almost every wall, little on the ceiling and a ton on the bathroom mirror. It looked like Dexter's playground. The guy survived. I guess the injury wasn't as bad as the scene would suggest, but holy hell was that an intense job. I really like that you use the term lady of the night. I went on a few ride-alongs with the county coroner. Worst was a woman that slit her wrists and maybe panicked because blood was on every inch of the bathroom. She fell into the tub where she died, but she left bizarre notes everywhere leaving things to people. Like her used hairspray to an individual, and why. Just lots of post-it notes for her garbage she left to people. How thoughtful of her. Craziest shit I ever hear as an EMT in training was a cops and EMTs responding to a GSW gunshot wound. Cops where I live have to clear the scene first before medical personnel can go in. They find the guy, head completely missing from the lower mandible upward. Two boys scared shitless hiding under their beds after witnessing him blow his head off with a 12 gauge. Medics where I live are legally required to check for a pulse. As one does and the other, they are tandem, calls it in. Said dead body stands up and sits back down. Then does it 2 more times. The last one puts its hands out like Frankenstein. Keep in mind there is nothing from the jawline up. The second officer said, if he does it 1 more time hair shooting him. As morbid as it is. I laughed at that part. Edit, whoever golded me. Thank you, but anyone further please donate it. I suggest Justin Wren's Fight for the Forgotten organization or any fund for the fires in CA. Was it the nerves that caused the body to move? I would get that his brain stem was intact. You've reached the end. You're a star. Destroy the subscribe button for more like that.